right. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Nola Simon. I'm the host of the Hybrid Remote Center of Excellence. And joining me today is Cher Jones. She is a personal branding expert. She trains with corporations how to actually create a brand that will help you establish why people should know and trust you. Is there something else I missed there, Cher? I'm sure I've done.
Yeah, so it's really about establishing your personal brand at work for work so that so your brand supports what you do on your job. It supports your future of where you want to go in your future of work and also makes the company brand look good as well. So it's like that trifecta of branding when you think about your personal brand at work. So you're right on path.
Perfect. And honestly, I think you started doing your lives, in 2018, you said?
Correct.
So I probably found you just shortly after that, 2019-ish, and started learning a lot about you. Actually, when we went to book this podcast, Cher has a lovely structure to her LinkedIn lives when she does it. She has this section where she highlights other people's content. It's called hashtag scroll stopper. And then there's a tap. Is it tap that up?
You got it.
And it's cheeky because she's make sure it's two P's. and then there's my Q to your A.
Yeah, my A's to your Q's.
Oh, there we go.
There you go.
There we go. But when she went to book the podcast interview, she was using an app that I use to schedule, and it's TidyCal. And I use TidyCal because of Cher, because I learned about it in your show. And I was also telling her before we started recording as well, one of my first guests is a personal stylist named Renee Lindo. And I met Renee in Cher's comments as well, too. And that's how we connected, because Cher has a gift of really engaging with people and making people feel really front and center in the conversation as she goes along. And she does it on the live versions in the video, but she also does it in audio rooms. And she really strategically takes advantage of building up that community and that reciprocity and that goodwill among the people who follow her. And even people who are experts in personal branding show up for your rooms, right? You have such respect throughout your community, and it's really great to see. And that's why I'm so honored to really have you here. But the other thing we were just talking about, and maybe we should start with that question, is we were talking about your brand at work and how essential it is to build that for now, but also for the future of work. And so how do you start with that? When you're in an organization, you're walking in, what's the first thing you assess?
The one thing that you have to recognize right away is that you bring your brand to work, no matter what. You bring your brand to work. So you, as someone who brings their brand, which if we're going to old school it, it's your reputation, right? And it's actually an enhanced version of your reputation. So it's like reputation is like brand 1.0, but branding as we see it now and all the tools that we have to influence the way people see us, they influence the way they receive us. It is so important that you influence that conversation. You influence the narrative that someone has already created based off of what they know. And that's the really interesting thing, is that we are constantly looking people up just to find out information, right? And most people, what they have used a lot of the tools for in the past, especially from a social media perspective, specifically LinkedIn, if we were to double tap on that for a second, is we've looked at that. In our minds, we look at LinkedIn as something like you use it for a job. And yes, that is true. But it's a yes. And it's more about the and than it is about the yes, because you look for a job, but so many times. And then once you're in your role, that is where you have to transition how you show up on LinkedIn. So it supports what you do now. It supports that level of trust that you want people to have and that recognition, right? So you want to be recognized, respected, and rewarded. But if you do not influence the way that people see you and respect the knowledge that you have, the experience that you bring to the table, if you don't put that out there, how are they going to know? And that's the question right there. So you've got to think about, to go back to your question, is where do you start? You got to think about, what am I walking into? and what are the best things that these people need to know about me. If you're coming in to lead a team, if you're coming in to be a part of a team, if within your role you need to outreach to people, you got to factor all those things in and say, what do these people need to know about me to have a better conversation, to start our conversations, not at the pleasantry, but going to be able to dive deep into that conversation at a level of trust that you can only start with knowledge. So it's your job to give them what you think they need to know.
Yeah. And I learned all of this personally the hard way. And I don't know that all this story, but I worked for a company for 17 and a half years. For 16 years, I was actually in the US division. And when I decided that I wanted to move over into the Canadian, I had a real challenge, even though I worked for the same company, getting hired in the Canadian division because nobody knew who I was. Nobody knew my capabilities because I was basically siloed away from the rest of the company. And so that's where I actually really started actively negotiating my brand within work. I started using Yammer and internal collaboration tools. I started volunteering for hackathons. I actually used a hackathon to land a job interview. I
Love
called the
it.
guy and I'm like, I know I don't have the exact background that you're looking for, but I'm like, I'm going to be the face of Toronto for this global hackathon. Watch me work. Because part of it was actually like a community based aspect of it as well. And I'm like, watch me work. And I got the job interview. I didn't actually get the job, but it got me the interview, right? Because it takes guts to really perform in front of 40,000 people and be able to say, hey, watch me all day.
Yeah.
And that's really what made the shift that I was able to actually move in 2019 to a Canadian division. And I attribute to raising my profile by using the internal tools that were available to communicate internally, but also RG work and using LinkedIn in particular and Twitter, that sort of thing. I moved into that new role and I actually walked in within 6 weeks. I was presenting to the executive leadership team in an innovation challenge. And I had people coming up to me going, why do people in Vancouver Island know who you are? Like you've only been here for like less than 6 weeks.
That is the
200
power.
connections.
Exactly. And that is the power of personal branding right there, because I love what you talked about as far as you leveraged internal tools. And so that's the difference between a lot of the other people in the personal branding space and how I guess, distinguish myself in that space is it's not just about what you put out there on LinkedIn. That is a huge tool and it is one important tool, not to downgrade it, but there are also those internal tools. It's how you show up. It's how you've built that network. It's the language that you're giving others to talk about you when you're not in the room. And then you're building these champions who are, I know Nola, even though they never met Nola in person,
Yeah.
but they've heard of you, they've seen you, they've watched you work literally. And these are these touch points that we have the honor of creating at work that can accelerate opportunities, accelerate conversations, and quite frankly, accelerate our future as we step into new places, opportunities, roles, projects, whatever the case may be. You can't get there the same way they did 10 years ago.
Yeah.
You need to use the power of branding, and it's not a nice to have, it is a must have.
Yeah, exactly. And when the pandemic actually started, I was actually approached by the communications team to found an ERG for parents because we knew that it was going to be challenging for people who are all of a sudden shifted completely work from home and have their kids there while they're working all the time too. We knew there was going to be support and they asked me if I would be the founder.
Wow.
And
And those
unfortunately,
are,
my role was
again,
restructured before we got far.
but those are opportunities that one, it came through. That doesn't, people don't just ask you to do something if they don't know you can do it. And so that part right there, if anybody's listening right now, if you just walk away with that, people do not ask you to do something unless they know you can do it. So they were convinced before they approached.
Yeah.
They trusted you
But the time
before they
frame,
extended it.
yeah, the time frame between when I was trying to get a promotion in 2016, 17, actually it was after my mom died in 2017, the time frame between 2017, 2019, it was less than 2 years. Nobody knew who I was. And then they're asking me to found a parenting group for 40,000 people.
Which is, and then you look at that audience that you got to get in front of, right?
Yeah.
And that potential of visibility. And then, and while it is in one specific lane, that audience then affords you the opportunity to lean them in other directions, to create awareness of who you are, to give them language about you outside of that parenting ERG.
Oh, yeah.
So,
And I was also involved in the women's group too. So I was actually asked, they ran into an issue where they didn't actually have a host. I was running comms anyway. So they're like, do you want to interview our like most important person, or what is it, the most powerful woman in Canada?
mm,
It was the whole keynote of that whole conference. So they just
talk
asked me
about
if I would do it.
visibility.
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that whole ERG aspect and that volunteer work was really key as well.
And I think there's just one more note to hit on this. And this becomes this is when it becomes a strategy of your personal brand.
Yes.
So there's a lot of challenges in taking up an ERG role because you don't get paid for it, but you can get paid for it in the sense of how you leverage the opportunity and the expectations that you have going into this opportunity. And some companies actually do provide some sort of compensation, but it's usually not the case. And so what one needs to be when they're thinking about their personal brand is, what do I want out of this opportunity? And what do I need to communicate up front that is a part of my strategy, that they need to know that this is my expectation of what I would like? And so that this is a win for you and for the company. But most people take on the role and hope. So they have this hope that they're going to get something out of it and hope that they're going to meet people. No, you need to be actively campaigning for one. You have to go in knowing what is it you want, and that can evolve, but you need to go in knowing what you would like to get out of this experience for your time, effort, and energy and passion that you're going to throw at this role, in addition to what's on the side of your desk that you still need to accomplish. And then two, knowing is half the battle. The other half is communicating that and having points in your communication to say, okay, these are the things that I would love to get out of this opportunity. And these are my plans for this opportunity. And set up checkpoints and specific requests that people can help you with. But then the backside of that opportunity is, how are you positioning yourself to take hold of what comes from that opportunity? So knowing that your brand supports what you're asking for. Yeah. And that is where I think the opportunity is lost, and then it becomes feeling like it's slave labor, that you're doing something outside of your job because you don't have the direct, and I'll call it monetization of an opportunity, because it's not always, it's going to lead to money if you do it right. But you need to know how you are going to monetize the opportunity.
Yeah. And I actually had started to do that too, because I ended up with a sponsor that I wasn't necessarily thrilled with. They had brought somebody new in, and they just put her as the face of the parenting ERG because it was brand new and it was an opportunity for her. And I'm like, yeah, but that doesn't work for me. So I actively went over and found myself a VP of strategy and said, hey, I really need another sponsor, because I wanted a co-sponsor who knew the company, who had tenure, and who would listen to me and already had a relationship with me. And I said, by the way, I'd also like to get into strategy. So if I bring you in as my co-sponsor, could we talk about strategy?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was laying the
that.
groundwork for that, but
I love that. And if people don't walk into our ERGs with a plan, you will immediately realize that this is a lot of work. And yes, I'm getting these, like the runoff of it, but it's not strategic. So you don't feel fed for what you're serving out.
And you need to make sure that it's fueling you as well, because is it going to be reflected on your performance review? Because for me, it wasn't. And I had issues with that because I always reported what I was doing, and I had it there because performance reviews are legal documents. I made sure that it was well written so that people understood that it benefited the company. But at the same time, it was not actually part of my job. Right.
Mm,
And so if I wasn't performing, it could have been held against me. So that's another piece that people really want to be negotiating as well is yes, volunteer work is great, but how does it really leapfrog you in a way that also doesn't hamstring you?
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that alone, because those opportunities do provide incredible visibility, but you've got to be smart about it before you say yes.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. So one thing that I managed to do before this conversation really started recording is I believe Cher's mine because I asked her how AI is really going to impact personal branding. And what I had done just before we started recording was I actually looked her up on ChatGPT, and all I said to ChatGPT was, "Tell me about Cher Jones." And let's just see. So it reads, Cher Jones is a Canadian social media trainer, personal branding expert, and keynote speaker known for her expertise in helping individuals and organizations improve their online presence. She has a corporate background in corporate training and has been recognized for her work in digital communication and personal branding. Almost perfect. Like literally, if you'd written that yourself, it wouldn't be half bad, right? And then I asked it about me. And now the thing you should know about ChatGPT, just the basic version, is that it doesn't have any updates to it since September of 2021. So I got restructured in December of 2020, and I was on sabbatical in 2021. I didn't really start doing active work until 2022. So for me, I said, "Tell me about Nola Simon." And it said, "I'm sorry, but I don't have any specific information about an individual named Nola Simon in my database up to my last knowledge update in 2021. It's possible she might not be widely recognized or may not have been in the public eye at that time." And then there's a whole thing about private individuals. So Cher is public and I'm a private individual. Thanks. Thanks for coming out.
Let me tell you how you blew my mind. Because again, we recognize how search one is evolving. We're starting to search through ChatGPT, and especially as as certain versions allow more access to the internet and whatnot, and how that can influence what's out there. But just, I asked you before we started, did you give it any like location specifics, anything like that? And I'm like, oh wow, it used me. There's more than one Cher Jones, and it used me to describe, and it described me well enough that it's just holy cow. I was so surprised. And then it just, again, it blows my mind into thinking that yet another aspect of personal branding has been unearthed, in the sense of how is ChatGPT going to describe you? And that I hadn't, to be honest, I hadn't thought about that, because I've never, for lack of a better word, ChatGPT'd myself or Googled myself on ChatGPT. I just never did. And then to go into to have that much detail. And I think ChatGPT is a wonderful tool, and it is going to, and so I'm sure we're leading into that direction around its impact on personal branding, because it's going to be significant. But there are a lot of things that people need to be aware of. So I'll pass the mic back to you and see where you want to go with this conversation.
Yeah, no, and that's the interesting part because for me, honestly, I signed up for LinkedIn a long time ago, but I didn't actively start using it until like 2016, 2017. So I had been active on social media. And that's where I find that it's fascinating that it knows nothing about me because I was pretty active,
Mm-hmm.
right? From 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, up until 2020, 21. Like I would have thought that I've done pretty well, really, to have myself out there. But I didn't have a website. I didn't do any media at that time. So that's where it's like, what is it picking up? And how do you influence it? That's where it's like,
Yeah.
how do you, because AI has, depending on how it's structured, how it's created, how it's trained, it may have some implicit biases in terms of how it's actually created and how it runs. And we don't necessarily know all of that. So, how do you influence it
That's
when
the
you
question.
don't see how it's pulling you data?
My guess would be, at this point, it's looking for what it would designate, or yeah, I guess designate as a reliable source. So yes, you, but then where else do you show up that someone else has verified or validated your credibility? So I'm looking at, when I think about what I have out there in the sense of other people other than LinkedIn, because you would think at least it would leverage LinkedIn or something like that. But then I think about the amount of stages I've been on over the last 8, 10 years or whatever. And then stuff with the media, stuff where I've been mentioned or quoted in articles and stuff like that. I would assume, but I really don't know. So that's a question for ChatGPT.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, where do
But
you,
it's also a question for individuals and organizations, because I'm sure you could look up organizations that way as well too, is how are you building a digital footprint in such a way that's going to set you up for success, not only just right now, but 5, 10 years from now? Like,
yeah,
what does this look like in the future? Because it's constantly evolving and it's constantly being trained in different ways, right?
yeah. And that part's mind blowing because here's the problem that most people have, most professionals, especially within corporate, they don't have the language to talk about themselves
I
in a
know.
succinct way where someone's
Yeah.
going to remember who they are. They're not going to, and if they're not remembered, that means they weren't recognized. And that means that if you're not giving them what they need to know to respect you, respect your knowledge, your experience, how are they going to be rewarding you or referring you? Like, these are all our words that I'm absolutely loving right now, but it goes beyond the alliteration here. It is serious business. Like, we have to now think about how are how are we influencing what people know, what people say, and then also what the internet knows and what it's pulling from? And is it in alignment with who we are putting out there? And is it a good representation of who we are? And and then how, as we evolve, because that's the other thing, brands evolved. If
Mhm.
you had checked for me like 10 years ago, I called myself a social media trainer at that time. I was already into the personal branding space. I would call myself a very early pioneer into that space. I could honestly say, and I don't say this lightly and I don't say it flippantly, is I was talking about personal branding before a majority of people had ever even thought about it. I have a talk. So I have an actual talk on YouTube from 2013, 99 problems, but my brand ain't one. And it was, yeah. And this is 2013. We're talking 10
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah.
And what's interesting from a foundational perspective, most of what I shared is still accurate to, if I go back right there and listen to it all, it's, other than the version of LinkedIn that I was showcasing at the time, or the version of Amazon, or the version of Jay-Z that I use the lyrics to teach us about personal branding, certain lyrics, those being older now, it
Yeah.
is still bang on because my approach to personal branding is rooted in my communication skills. So I worked in journalism, PR, and corporate communications, and I've done corporate strategies, especially within the government sectors. And that was something that has informed my approach. So not only was I like tech savvy, I also rooted it in foundational communications principles that are standing the test of time, regardless of what technology it interfaces with.
Yeah, no, and it's fabulous. I love your approach. I think it's so smart. And I've learned so much from you. And
Thank you.
to be honest, I think that it's just going to continue being incredibly important, because so much of the content is all about cover letters and resumes. But I don't know that the future of how we start to trust each other in like personal life and in business relationships is really limited to cover letters and resumes. I think it's much deeper than that, just from that example alone, right?
Absolutely. And you've got cover letters and resumes that are really targeted to a very specific audience, where
Mm.
your brand is not necessarily for everyone, but it is for those who should be looking you up and checking you out. So you've got to think about that audience as a whole. It doesn't, and that's the interesting thing, is I don't think your brand needs to ever be for everyone. Like, it doesn't have to, but it should attract those that you are either meant to serve in your role or through your business. And also, and even personally or professionally, like, it should attract It should attract those people, and it should repel those who don't
Mm.
care. So you've got like things like your headline, which is really a headline in any profile kind of defines what I'm clicking into. And then I can at that point, just by reading your headline, and that's why headlines I think are one of the most important online assets that people should take the time to develop, is that headline then does that helps me to determine, do I want to click in, or is this all I need to know? And there's no problem if it's all I need to know. But I do want, for those people who need to know more, that headline should be, it should be just like almost like a dog whistle, that they can hear it, that they get like, oh, I need to know more about him or her. So I think what the headline is one of your biggest assets besides your picture, because like we always click on pictures.
Yeah, exactly. And what about congruence? So it's LinkedIn is obviously like the place, especially from a professional basis, that a lot of people start, but you really want to be showing up as the same person in all the different places. You mentioned YouTube, but there's Pinterest, there's X or Twitter or whatever you want to call it this month.
Yes.
Threads, like all these different places, and they're all slightly different, but you want to be
Yes.
recognizably yourself.
Yes. And this is an interesting challenge that a lot of people have to deal with, because when we go to different places, we do become another version that fits the place. For example, we go to a business conference that's relevant to our interests. This side of us comes out. Where we go to a family event, another side of us come out. We are still us. And so the challenge is knowing, it's almost like knowing what is public. And it is more of a challenge than we think, because
Mhm.
I can't be the same person 100% that I am on LinkedIn, that I am on Facebook, because my Facebook, and for those of you who actually still use Facebook, it has a very specific lane. So the interesting thing is 10 years ago, that would have been the absolute advice. You need to be the same person on every single channel that you're on, right? You need to show up exactly the same. What I like to shift with that thinking is you need to make sure that one place doesn't embarrass the other, good or bad.
Yeah.
Right. And that there's a consistency of seeing the 360 version of you, because you have certain permission spaces that you have on TikTok or that you have on Instagram that you can share and be more free in certain areas. Whereas on TikTok or on Instagram, there are certain things that is just, they don't really care. The audience that I have cultivated and developed don't really care about these certain things. I can make them care, but it really means about cultivating a different audience, but depends strategically how you're going to use it. But I think what we need to recognize is that the more tools that we use from a social media perspective is the bigger opportunity we have to show a 360 view of our brand, if we choose to show that much. But what you want is to make sure that there is a consistency in you, in the sense that the you on Instagram won't embarrass the you on LinkedIn, because it's you. So it's connected. You don't have to have the exact same voice or share the exact same content unless you're strategically aligning them. And that's a different conversation. But just generally speaking, from a personal branding perspective, you can show different aspects of you. But again, it can't be so much of a stark difference between the two that you're like, who are the fundamental foundation of, if you're an empathetic person, if you are, I think everybody should be, in my opinion, personally professional, meaning how they show up. There has to be, and you can throttle the personal or you can throttle the professional, but there has to be some combination of them both so that you can protect the integrity of your future. And it does matter, right? And it's just a very interesting, hard to balance bubble if you don't have those throttles in place to make sure that there's a level of protection, because there are things that can truly impact your future.
Yeah. And I also find that like there's certain places where I just don't show up well because of the people who happen to be there. So like on
Yes.
Facebook, I have my family, I have my old babysitters, I have
Yeah.
my high school contacts, right? There's a lot of people, and like I I find that I
Yes.
perform.
Yes.
And my coach has actually told me that you have to assess the places where you're not coming across well because of
Yeah.
who's there. And
Right.
that's Instagram and that's Facebook, because I'm showing off in a different way that I do professionally when people actually respect my work and know what I do.
Right. And that's the challenge. So sometimes, and that performative aspect, like no one likes to feel like we're performing or showcasing the side that we know or we feel judged on. Right. And
Yeah,
that's
I
the
feel
other
like I have
piece.
to prove myself and that
Yeah.
my knowledge is worthwhile, whereas I don't necessarily feel that in LinkedIn or Twitter or Threads or
Right.
whatever. Yeah.
Because it has those spots who have created the spaces. So then you have to recognize for or acknowledge for yourself is how much time do I actually want to spend here? And is it worth my time? And does it change my feelings about who I am and how I show up so much that it impacts me negatively?
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's still a tool, and that's you can downgrade certain networks to being a tool where you can use it as an engagement tool. I don't post a lot on Instagram and I don't post a lot on Facebook. I really don't. Just because one is you only have so much time.
Yeah.
And two, I'll use it as a tool because I think they're wonderful, incredible tools to stay connected to people in our lives that we wouldn't otherwise be able to stay connected to by seeing what they're sharing. And I use it more as a commenting or DMing tool. And I do that in Instagram as well. And occasionally I'll share stuff just more from a presence opportunity. So if someone's looking me up and they find me, whatever, they see enough that it is in alignment with who I am. But that doesn't mean you have to post there. And you can give yourself that grace and permission to be like, no, it's just a tool. It's a stay in touch tool. It's me going to the golf course or me going to the baby shower or me going to the wedding. I get to be a part of that conversation. And when they go back to my profile and they're reminded of what I do and how I can help them if the opportunity strikes, that's amazing. But it allows me just to stay in touch in a different way. And I'm okay with not having to create content for that space.
Yeah. And that's where I step back from. I'm looking, honestly, stepping back from a lot of places where it's like, it doesn't feel like it's worthwhile. And it's not,
Yeah. And
not
just look
what
at
I
it
want to
as
do.
the tool that it is. It's that stay in touch tool. Cause there's certain things that quite frankly, why people don't get rid of Facebook if they're not actively on it is just because it becomes an accessibility tool, literally not in accessibility formats that we normally think, but meaning I can access you. You
Yes,
can access me easily. And if I had to get in touch with you for all the family or life milestones, I can do so.
exactly. The only reason I keep Facebook is because of the pictures.
Mhm,
And that's
mhm.
that's the blackmail that they've got.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's why Google Plus, when they first came out, and it was actually a better network and how it functioned and how it allowed you to quadrant off different people. And it was like a well thought out way of doing things, but people couldn't abandon the investment that they made in the legacy of who they are by
Mm,
what they've uploaded and who they've connected to. And that's why Facebook Meta was so smart in buying Instagram because they saw the shift and now they leverage both. And then they also have WhatsApp. And so very strategic acquisitions that maintain their relevance in so many different ways.
mhm. Yeah, it is interesting. Actually, that's something that maybe we should talk about is it seems like so many people are just actually getting fed up with managing their brands online and
Mhm.
engaging that way. And it's every time like the whole Twitter meltdown and threads and that whole introduction. And it was just, what is it, Mastodon and all the other places?
Yeah.
It's like another place to build. So what's your take on that? And what's your advice to organizations who are encouraging their employees to get more active in building their personal brands?
It depends on where your customers are,
Hmm.
one, and it depends on how you can. I think so. I'm always going to be a fan of LinkedIn. The it's like the professional home of your personal brand, right? So no matter what, right now things have not changed enough, and there's been other sites that have come up and try to dethrone it, but no one's been able to dethrone LinkedIn for what it is, and they've evolved enough although there's a lot of things I think they do half-assed. So when LinkedIn got LinkedIn audio, when I felt, and I still feel like they could have done so much better with that tech, considering what Twitter Spaces did to innovate on Clubhouse. And Twitter Spaces was certainly better, but LinkedIn had the better community to grow that technology. But they didn't do as well as they could, but it's still a good technology to use.
Why can't
Anyways,
they record? That's the thing that comes up all the time. It's like,
100%.
why can't they? Honestly, that would be such a game changer, especially since they already had that podcast aspect as
Exactly.
well.
And there's so many different things. And there's just even like the interaction within a room. There's so many different things. But to go back to your question around what does one do with all of these options to build their brand and more coming, like threads and stuff like that. And we saw that threads had a really record breaking adoption in the sense that everybody quickly set up their account, mainly because it was a friction free, and they did a friction free experience, and they did a really good job of opening it earlier than they thought, and people run and jumped and try to get their threads account. But the thing is, here's the biggest problem, is like you join into these different networks, and one of the biggest hardest things that you can ever do within a network is get people to come back. It's so easy to set up an account, but the question is, are you going to go back, and why are you going to go back, and how are you going to train the behavior? And so I would say is you got to look strategically at what you want, just period. Personally, professionally, you got to look at what you want and how much time you really have, and what's it going to take to get you there? Who's it going to take to get you there? And how can you help people along the way? Right? Who do you have to help? And you got to look at that. Who do you have to help to get there is really one of the best ways, as opposed to who can help you. Who do you have to help? And that becomes your audience in that sense. And then the other piece is how much, we go back to that time piece. How much time do I have? And what is the best use of my time? So we've got all these networks. We've got people like Gary Vee saying you got to be on all the networks, posting 5 to 10 times per day, and blah, 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 blah. And none of that advice is bad in its promise to give you what, if you do all that, yes, you will get somewhere. The question is, can you sustain it? It does work, but does it matter? So one of the things I love about what I do is I myopically focus on your personal brand at work, as opposed to looking at the big grand scale, like we were just talking about. You've got this 360 view of your personal brand. And let's not forget, although I'm not on the market right now, but like dating sites, that's another aspect of your personal brand. And it's equally setting up a profile. Because I remember when I was on the dating streets, like seeing, it was actually a great social experiment for me for what I do in personal branding space, is seeing how you are setting up yet another side of you. And does that embarrass my LinkedIn, or does my LinkedIn embarrass my Bumble? Right? In the sense that I look so boring and so stuck up on LinkedIn, that is this the same person that's so cool over here? And there's like this inconsistency. So you have to find that consistent experience, even though it's showing a different side. So bottom line is so one, always, you got to do something on LinkedIn, right? You have to have a presence, because it is the only networking site that really gives you the opportunity to articulate yourself, your brand, and give people the language to talk about you from a professional side in its creation, and how it's created, and what we can do with the site. And then also, that's one piece, but also because the people are there, that's where the people go to check it. Yes, you can do this on a website, but it takes a lot to find that and to go there and to click on there. Whereas LinkedIn is effortless in that sense. And then the second piece is, now, where are the best uses of my time? And you've got to look at, just, does this conference make sense for me to go to? Is it, I'm interested, or is this, these are all the things I'm interested in? You got to look at your social presence the same way. So you've got to look at, and then you got to look at, especially when you're talking about your brand at work, is it better to be building internally or externally? Usually when we think about personal branding, we're thinking about thought leadership and content and all that stuff, when it's not necessarily the case for most people, right? They've got to work on the language and how they articulate what it is they do and how they serve and how they can help you first, right? And then now then you mentioned things beautiful. You talked about how you were on Yem, or how you're on these internal networks, how you're networking inside, because that moved the dial. It wasn't necessarily like the LinkedIn supported that effort, right? But it wasn't your effort on LinkedIn first that got you that internal visibility that you needed.
Yeah. It's funny if you actually go through my job history right now, because I was pivoting from what I've always done to what I'm doing now. I didn't necessarily want to list out like tasks and skills and what I'd done. So
Right.
I have actually, these are the stories I like to tell. Ask me about them. And
Yeah.
it's like these types of stories that I've just told you, including the one where, I knew I'd done a really good job with my personal brand at work because the CEO walked into the room looking for me and then got the photographer to take a picture, which ended up in the center of the social media, which was funny because I had also bribed the photographer to take that same picture. But yeah, so that story is one of those stories that's in there. And I find that's a way to capture attention, right? Because I'm looking for you to start a discussion with me. Talk to me about it.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's what your presence should do, is get you to hello.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
Get you to have the conversation, and you, through what you share, what you put out there, determine the conversations that you're attracting to you, right?
Yeah.
Your headline also sets the stage for what you like to talk about and what you like to do. And then the interesting thing is that content, you can use that to grow your brand, as opposed to thinking that you got to fit it all in your headline. You can use content to grow the conversation, grow and experiment with other areas that you're interested in, or double tap on some of them you want to go deeper in and really prove what you want to talk about, what you know, and how you can help. So you don't have, and I think that's the stress that people have, is they think they have to articulate everything and everything all at once. And it's no, you really don't. Because even with your LinkedIn profile, like, how many LinkedIn profiles have you read more than once if you didn't have to? Meaning you might have read mine when you first met me, and then because we're on the interview now, you went back and you took a look. But outside of that, we don't go back and read people's profiles,
Yeah.
right? If we read them at all.
Cher was on Stephen and Chris. If you are in Toronto, you'll know who those designers are. And I had no idea until I scoped at your profile right before this call. I'm like, cool. I wish I had known that. Would have just changed the conversation somehow.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, these are the things that we can feed people to. And then how does that relate back to what I do with personal branding? It's all content. And it's that TV side of things, the TV side of my employment and professional history, that also plays into us creating content, us showing up on camera or in podcasts or anything else, where these things all matter. And the produce side of it, when you're putting together whether what you're going to say or the idea of the segment, and that all comes back to, I can dial that back to some of my training and some of the things I did and learned through that experience there.
One piece of content that I remember you did. You remember the piece that you did got the attention of Daniel Roth with
Yes.
LinkedIn, and you took a report that they had done, you made it all fancy and pretty, and then you explained how you had created it. And what did that actually end up with the result? Because I remember he featured you but it opened up
Yes.
opportunities for other things, right?
It certainly opened up opportunities. And I'm just trying to remember the chicken or the egg as far as when I did it was right around the time when I was starting to get access to some people in LinkedIn, that eventually it led to me getting on LinkedIn Learning. I've done 3 courses with them since then. But
Yeah.
it was one of the things that for me that I'm able to, I guess, touch that story again, is having that as cachet to someone like the editor in chief of LinkedIn, saying, establishing me as a creator to watch, and then being able to, and this is part of what I do. So that validation, right? And that exposure. And it was just, it was something that was, I would say, definitely fast forwarded opportunities for me, open doors just by trust and trust alone, because that was an extension of trust. And that was LinkedIn extending their trust towards me and my brand, and which then expands that trust from other people where it's, oh, you train in and around the space. I don't consider myself a LinkedIn trainer. I include LinkedIn as part of what I do, but I wouldn't, there's a lot of people who call themselves LinkedIn trainers. I wouldn't call myself that, because your brand at work is way more than LinkedIn, but LinkedIn is a crucial component of it. So it just gives me but a lot of people will associate LinkedIn with personal branding as if they're synonymous. But so either way, it still works for me because the editor in chief said I'm a creator to watch and he featured my content. That's kind of a big
Oh, I
deal.
know. It was cool. And what I remember is you were just so celebrated. Like that reciprocity that we talked about. People are
Yeah.
coming out of the woodwork going, yeah, like it's about time you recognized her because she's been doing this
Yes.
forever. And it's great to see
Thank
it
you for
celebrated.
reminding me of that. Because
Yeah.
I do forget about that because I feel like I've been sharing content, creating content for this network for a long time. And I felt like while I built the community around me, which I am so grateful for, I felt like the network itself, for all the hard work and effort that I put into the network, I was seeing other people get recognized, and I was, what about me, guys? But it's at the same time, it is what it is. And then to see that happen was just, it felt really good. And
Yeah.
then on top of that, like you said, like the other stuff, the opportunities that even still now, it's that name drop. It's the legit name drop in addition to doing my courses. And that again opens up doors and trust. And that's what we want to do with our content. That's what we want to do with our connections, being very intentional about how we are leveraging our personal brands at work and what that can do for us and the ripple effect of it.
Yeah. And it's not just about going viral. That's the
No,
least interesting part of uh, content on LinkedIn. And it's actually commented and said that viral is not really what they want anyway. But it's that ability to build that strategy, right?
and let me just also, just to stick a pin in that part around the stuff that virality is, like the stuff that you see that goes viral, so to speak, on LinkedIn, primarily for the most part has to do with like selfies or things that I don't remember the person who went viral for it. I'll remember the moment, but I don't necessarily associate the skill set to the virality of anything that I see that goes
Right.
actively viral on LinkedIn. So while it's, yeah, that's a great accolade, and I'm not at all hating on the other side of, well, mine didn't go viral or whatever. It was like, it's one of those things that when you really assess how many things that you've seen where it's just been like next level, like engagement, right? There's almost like a formula to it where you're like, but I don't remember the person who did it and why they got it. Or I can see that, but I can see why that went viral, but I don't associate why it went viral to that person's skill set.
Exactly. A lot of times it's just like it time, right place.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's
A hot
sort of
topic. It's whatever.
exactly that. It's like the
It's
one
not
hit
even their
wonder.
content. It is often not their content. And
Well, that's a whole different story. Yeah.
yeah.
You don't want to do that because that's not good for your personal brand.
No, no.
Yeah. So let's do, and I have to come up with creative titles like Cher always does. But so I'm adding in structure to the podcast. So one of the things that I like to ask is, what's the best question that you find works so well to get people really actively thinking about their personal brand? Like the type of question that really just resonates and you always get a good answer from somebody.
My question is so basic, but it is exactly what I need to hear, like the answer. And I always preface it with, listen, do not censor your answer for me. And it's, what is it you want? What do you want? And it's literally, tell me what you want, because one of the biggest skills, or one of my favorite skills that I have that I've been able to hone, is to listen to someone's story and connect the dots
Mm,
towards their future. But I got to know what you want so that when I'm hearing the rest of what you're going to tell me and the questions that I need to ask you that come out of that, what do you want? You gotta give me that nugget. You gotta give me the info. And I love that question, because especially when I preface it with a, listen, I don't care. Just tell me what you want. Because it's the PR side of me that is looking at, how do we spin it? And I don't mean it in a spin doctor way, but how do we position and present your experience while you may see and this is one of my things that I love about what I do, is I can see how that skill from this thing way over here and this skill from this thing that you do right now has formed your perspective on how it is you serve others and why you do things the way you do. Like, I love, to me, that's the puzzle. But it all, in order for me to connect it in a way that supports what you want, I got to know, what do you want? So everybody gets that question. And then I just go off from there.
That's awesome. And of course, you're talking and I'm hearing the Spice Girls. Have you ever done content to
Tell me what
tell
you
me
want,
what you
what you
want, what
really
you
want.
really, really
That
want?
used to be, I'm sure there's a talk somewhere on the internet. That used to be one of the things that was like one of my go-to. Tell me what
Yeah.
you want, what you really want. I would always
Okay.
say that, but I did it from like 2013 to maybe 2017. I was like, okay, gotta let it go.
We need new music, Cher.
I know, exactly. Because I'm putting myself out there and be like, wait, carry the 4. Oh, what? You are? Oh, yes. No, I am not a millennial. I'm millennial adjacent over here in the Gen X crew. You know what I mean? So
You're an elder, or would you be? I guess you'd be a young Gen X.
I'm right in the middle.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I'm like 49. Yeah, so
You too.
that's what I'm saying. So I'm like right up in there. But I'll call myself millennial adjacent.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny.
Mm-hmm.
So the other question I like to ask is, what's your favorite vision for the future? If we were taking all the work that you do with organizations, individuals, and bring that out 5, 10 years from now, what would you love to see? What's your favorite vision of what could be?
There's nothing I love more than seeing people really working in their awesome, like really like what drives me to do what I do. So like my foundational why is really based off of a revelation that it's hard to ignore awesome. And I believe that everyone has been gifted with a piece of awesome. There's something about you that you are supposed to use, that you are meant to serve others with. And specifically, let's go into the work, because we spend so much time at work, right? So whether you are and most people are not in the exact space that their skills and what they love and where they want to be, they're not perfectly aligned right now, but there are things that they get to do that lights them up and that can be applied to where they are right now. So I think that as we I think we have a lot more control over that than we think, as far as the stuff that we get to do and the stuff that we want to do. Most times that we don't get to do it is because people didn't know you were that good at it or have that skill set to do it. So I want people to own their awesome, because when people put their awesome out there in a right way, it's hard to ignore it. You can't ignore awesome. You see something awesome in the street, what's the first thing you do? You take a picture of it, you post it, because you can't ignore it. It's awesome. You want to share it. That's what we do, right? So if we take that same human behavior that is innate in every single one of us, and then showcase in a way of service. So that's the other side of it. We can't just blast and brag about our awesome. We have to position it in a way of how we leverage this awesome to serve others. And here's why you can trust me, because I've done this and this, and I know I can help you too. That kind of positioning changes everything, because then when you're putting yourself out there and you're letting people know how they can see you, what skills you have, you're going to attract, through knowledge and through what you're putting out there, more of what you should be doing. Because when you see people, like when they're lit up at work, that is a beautiful thing, because that has such a ripple effect on when you're satisfied or you're doing satisfying things. And I'm not trying to paint some magical workplace where everybody's absolutely thrilled with everything they do. But when we are stepping into more of the things that light us up, and when we are creating access and ways to do that through networking, through serving the right people, letting people know the right skill sets you have, you leave those places. You want to stay there longer, but you leave those places, you leave work, you go home, and that ripple effect is felt, right? You're happier at work, you're happier at home. I just think that there's such a connection to what we do and how we serve at work. And we spend so much time out there that it would thrill me because it's so hard, especially ChatGPT, like literally blew my mind in November, December, when we were seeing this as, oh my gosh, everything's changing. What I thought was super special about me, a machine can do. And so I had to now rethink how I show up. But at the end of the day, I know I've given you such a long-winded question or a long-winded answer because I'm good at that.
I
It's another
asked for a
skill of mine.
vision. You're giving me a
Yes.
vision.
And so it's just for me, it's like the more people are leveraging personal branding and more organizations that recognize how powerful personal branding is at work for work, right? Is the happier your employees are going to be because they're leveraging their brands to work in their zones of genius. They're awesome, especially when they are aware strategically how they can leverage it to help them in their role, help them build their career, and connect it to the company brand as well. You're talking a lot of happier places. And I really believe, especially when you think about all the leadership programs, all the DEIB programs, all of that stuff, when you think it's at the end of the day, they're connected by people. Their success is intrinsically connected to the people that they're associated to. From a leadership program, those people, if they're better branded, that means their sponsors and champions can better advocate for them into where they should be. If they are better connected, if they're in a sales role or in a recruiting role, they do better in their role as well in their job. So again, and then creating content for the company, whatever it is you need to do, show up, partnerships, all that kind of stuff. If you have a better brand, you can do a better job. Wow, that's that right there. If you have a better brand, you can do a better job. I stand on that. That is what I want to see. Is I want to see branded people because I believe in the power of branding. And that is my vision, because technically speaking, I don't know where we're going to be now with things like ChatGPT and all the AI that's coming out and all the things it can do. But I know that better branded people are happier people, and we're going to have a better place out of that.
And that's fascinating because, like you mentioned, trust. And as a society, we're moving actually from like organizational trust to distributed trust. In that, with hybrid work, that just in the way reviews and recommendations work, Airbnb, Uber, right? It's all run through personal recommendations from those people. And you have to have a good rating for people to trust that your review, your rating is worthwhile. And it's the same sort of thing in what we're talking about, personal branding. But the other aspect that you're mentioning about the happiness is people, there's a correlation in the research that's been done about trust, is people who are trusted are happier, perform better because they're not being micromanaged. And that's where this proximity bias, where you have to be in the office to be trusted so that we could trust that you're working, that's actually not trust. You're trying to actually control. Right. And that's where, if you advance the personal brand to the point where you can be trusted to work without being monitored, that's the magic.
That is the magic, right? And wow, that's another whole rabbit hole of the power of personal branding as well, like around that building trust, and they're happier people. Like that alone is huge for me. So I thank you for sharing that with me.
Oh yeah, no, it's funny. Once you start researching trust, you see it everywhere in every aspect. And so, but we are at end of time. Is there anything that you wanted to mention that we didn't actually talk about?
No, actually, yes. One thing, if you're out there and you're thinking about your personal brand and you're thinking, okay, what do I need to do next? Don't worry. Cher's got you. Just head over to personalbrandingquiz.com, and I have a 8-question quiz that will help you based off of where you're at right now and building your brand at work. That will help you think about what your next step should be. So again, personalbrandingquiz.com, head over there and it'll help you figure it out. And there'll be a little video at the end for you to watch, and it'll give you some nuggets on what you can do next.
That's excellent. And you can find Cher on LinkedIn. An easy way is she has a hashtag, just ask Cher. She's brilliant at all of these little things that are memorable. And I'll put all of that in the show notes as well, so people can find it.
Amazing.
Thank you. I really appreciate this is a fun talk. I loved it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right.
but